Well, good evening. It's really good to be here tonight. It's really strange being here in an empty building with just me and Troy. It's strange. I can't lie. But it is good to be here, even just the two of us. It's something about, I know the building is not the church, obviously, but it's just something, it is good to be here. And I look forward to that day, like Troy mentioned, when we can all be back together. Speaking of that, it was really nice last Saturday for a lot of members to see a lot of these members from Margaret Street at Troy and Molly's wedding parade. I know it got a chance to see the Menzies, let them cut us in line. That's okay. Didn't make them go to the back. Let's see Lisa Webb, and got to wave at Mr. Cannon. So just seeing a couple of you guys out there, albeit from a safe social distancing, it was really good. And by the way, Miss Helen, I'm really looking forward to that hug. I want to thank the elders for this opportunity that they have provided me to bring this lesson to you tonight. Just to quickly kind of fill you in on how I had this opportunity to fill in tonight. Originally, Troy and Andrew were going to be taking one of this really neat trips where they were going to get to go to Israel, and unfortunately, with this pandemic, that got canceled. So I was going to be filling in for Troy on one of his Sunday morning classes. And, well, when all that happened, that need wasn't there anymore. As we're all kind of, with my family, we're worshiping at my in-laws' house with at Mr. Buzz and Miss Paula's house, along with Brooke and Jeff and the kids. And so that's been kind of neat. But that opportunity turned into this opportunity tonight to bring you this lesson here on Wednesday. Now, I got to admit to you, this is a little out of my comfort zone. Most of you know that, I'm an elementary school teacher. I teach 10 and 11-year-olds. Fifth grade. I can be goofy with them all day long, comfortable talking to them, teaching with them, joking around with them. Ayla Grace knows that. Hey, Ayla. But to be honest with you, speaking in front of adults, and I know there's no other adults here, but I feel like I'm, talking to you, it's never quite been my jam. So I've got a little bit of butterflies in me, but this kind of reminds me of my very first year teaching, 13 or 14 years ago. I was at Berry Hill Elementary. I was a fourth grade teacher, and it had open house. And that's kind of where the parents come in, and they, get to look at the classroom, you explain the rules and procedures to you. I had one parent ask me how old I was. I had another basically give me the stink eye all night long. So I was nervous. However, I'm just hoping, since it's just me and Troy here, Troy doesn't look over this computer monitor over here and start giving me the stink eye. So if he doesn't do that, then I'll be doing okay. So as I thought about basically how I was going to be jumping into what I consider to be the deep end of the pool as far as Bible class teaching goes on the Sunday morning auditorium class, I was thinking, what am I going to teach to the members here? There's a lot of knowledgeable folks who come to the Sunday morning auditorium class, and I started thinking, what is it what lesson could I bring that could be a benefit to these people? And I was really struggling coming up with my topic. And then I remembered something that Troy would mention from the pulpit, back there behind me, on Sunday mornings, that oftentimes when he is getting his lessons together, that, it's not just written for us, the members of the congregation, that he's bringing the message to, but sometimes it's a message for himself. And so I thought about, okay, well, what's something that, I want to know more about of? And then even knowing how Joe Wilson will oftentimes when he teaches a class, and he does a great job as well, how he'll mention, you'll never learn as much about a subject until you actually teach something. So then again, I got the ball rolling. What am I going to teach that is going to benefit, hopefully, you guys, but what is something that, selfish last thing, what can I get out of? What do I need? What is something that I need to study more, that I want to learn more about? And also I wanted to kind of tie in, because again, this is that time where we weren't on lockdown. I started to think about how could I tie this into the elders' mission for this year of having that outward focus? What is something that I could think to teach that could maybe help us with that idea? Then wanted to also incorporate maybe how this bring, teach, keep book. So we'll get to that. So once I put all those things together, it was a lot easier to come up with my topic at that point. So tonight, the topic that I want to bring to you is how all Christians can accomplish God's work. So I hope that this lesson is going to be beneficial for you, like it has been beneficial for me putting it together. So, as an elementary school teacher, I teach math, science, social studies, language arts, which includes reading, writing, grammar. So I've got a busy day every day. One of the things that we talk about in reading is how we can describe characters. So I teach my students that when you teach reading and you're learning about characters, there's a lot of times there's 3 good ways that you can learn about characters. So some of these methods are you can learn about these characters through their actions. What are they doing? What are they doing in the story? What do their actions tell you about them? Another method of how you can learn about characters is through their spoken words. What are they saying? How do they interact and talk with other characters? And oftentimes you can also learn about characters through their thoughts. So tonight I want to focus on 2 individuals from the Bible and how God used them to accomplish his work. We're going to look at Peter, and we're going to look at Paul. So now you may be thinking, well, of course they accomplished God's work. They were both apostles, filled with apostolic authority. Peter sat at the feet of Jesus listening to his teachings. He saw countless miracles performed. So, easy lesson, right? Done. We're out of here. Record time. Well, as some of you college football fans will know, when Lee Corso's making his college game day predictions, he'll say, "Ha! Not so fast, my friends." So yeah, these men did incredible things. They did amazing things. But they are far from perfect. They were filled with doubt at times. They were filled with worry and anxiety. They made their fair share of mistakes. Just like me. Yep. Just like you. So if we can look at these people, at Peter, and we can look at Paul, and we can understand that they weren't perfect, far from it, and they had similar character traits as us, then hopefully that can be an encouragement for us as we all strive to heed the Great Commission that's found in Matthew and Mark. Matthew, the Great Commission in Matthew, starting in chapter 28 and verse 19, says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." Also, Mark's account in chapter 16, verse 15 says, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." I want to start with the Apostle Peter. So, before Peter was a disciple of Christ and later an apostle, we know what his occupation was. He was a fisherman with his brother Andrew. So in the first century, to be a successful fisherman, you had to be patient. So I know a lot of you guys who fish out there are probably thinking, well, that hasn't changed from the first century to the 21st century. I'm sure Blake Hatcher could tell you that. I know he loves to fish. They had to be extremely hardworking, and they had to be willing to endure a lot of hardship in pursuit of their catch. These fishermen, they would often work all night long, and sometimes with mixed results. So think about the account that is described in Luke chapter 5, verse 5, when Peter says to Jesus, "Master," I can just hear this almost this in his voice, "Master, we have toiled all night." Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 18, describes the first encounter that Jesus had with Peter and his brother Andrew. Let's go to Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 18. And I'll be reading out of the New there's my first tongue twister. That happens to me a lot when I teach in school, by the way. New King James Version, chapter 4. Let's go there. Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 18. Again, recounting the first account where Jesus has his first encounter with Peter and his brother Andrew. Starting in 18. And Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Then he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." They immediately left their nets and followed him. I'm going to read verse 20 again. They immediately left their nets and followed him. So the adverb that you're looking at there in verse 20 for you grammar nerds out there, I'm talking April Davis, Amy Napier, is immediately. They immediately stopped their fishing, which was their occupation, their livelihood, to follow Jesus. The NIV says, at once they left their nets and followed him. The American Standard Version says, and they straightway left the nets and followed him. Peter didn't hem and haw. Well, I got to finish cleaning up over here. No, he wasn't like the disciple that's described in Matthew 8, verse 21. Then another of his disciples said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead." Peter didn't wait around. He took immediate action. So, what does that action tell us about Peter? What does that character trait say about him? I believe that it shows that Peter had the courage to do what he knew needed to be done. At that moment, when Jesus said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men," Peter left his nets and started following Jesus. Does that remind you of yourself? Maybe you did leave a career or occupation to follow Jesus. Troy did. But I bet for many of us, we didn't have to leave our jobs to become a follower of Christ. But it did take a demonstration of your courage to confess his name in front of others and maybe get over the fear of judgment that some may have had for you to put on Christ in baptism. Now, hopefully they didn't, but it's possible. It does take courage when you are a Christian and maybe you've fallen away, or maybe you're struggling with sin or something along that nature, and you know you got to make things right with God. And that invitation song comes on, and everybody's singing, and you get up and you walk down the middle of that aisle and go to the front and let your request be made known. That takes courage. So as a disciple of Christ, Peter had the honor to travel with Jesus, be in his presence daily, and see his miracles performed on a consistent basis. So, knowing all that, it must have been easy for Peter to never have any doubt, right? Again, what would Lee Corso say? I'll hold my prop up. Not so fast, my friends. Last time I'll need that. So go ahead and let's turn over to Matthew chapter 14. To set the context here, Peter has been around Jesus all day, who has spent the entire day teaching the multitude many things. Wouldn't it be great to know those many things he was teaching? Healing the sick, and of course, feeding them with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. Peter has literally spent the day with Jesus listening to those teachings and observing miracles of healing and the feeding of the multitudes. Go with me to Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 22. We're going to read through 22 through 33. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. Imagine, Jesus, God in the flesh, but he's human, he's tired. He's had a busy day, to put it mildly. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now on the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had walked down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him, and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. So what happened to Peter? He had just proclaimed to Jesus that he was the Christ, chapter 9, verse 20. Peter, as a disciple of Jesus, without a doubt, knows the voice of Jesus, knows what it sounds like when Peter asked him in verse 28 to command me to come to the water to you. But it's not long, however, before Peter starts to sink into the water from the fear of the boisterous wind. So, again, what character trait is demonstrated here? Is it safe to say that Peter had doubt? Well, I think it is, because again, even Jesus, right there in verse 31, asks him why he doubted. Have you ever experienced doubt? I think it's a normal feeling to have. But Peter didn't let this stop him from accomplishing God's work. Let's don't let doubt creep into our minds and our thoughts and cloud the truth that we know. Now I want to look at the account of Jesus predicting Peter's denial. To set the context here, Jesus and the apostles have been celebrating a Passover meal. He's already shared that one of the 12 is going to betray him, and they've sung a hymn. He's instituted the Lord's Supper, and they sung a hymn. Let's go to Matthew chapter 26. Starting in chapter 26, starting in verse 31. Then Jesus said to them, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered." Now, that's actually fulfills a prophecy about Jesus in Zechariah chapter 13, verse 7. Okay, backing up, starting again, 31. Then Jesus said to them, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter answered and said to him, "Even if all are made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble." Jesus said to him, "Assuredly, I say to you that this night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And so said all the disciples. So we know that, oftentimes Peter gets a bad rap for being the one, but again, all the disciples were saying this. However, Peter's kind of boisterous there, isn't he? Let's go over to Mark and read Mark's account about this in Mark chapter 14. Starting in verse 27. Mark 14, starting in verse 27. Then Jesus said to them, again, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even if all are made to stumble, yet I will not be." Jesus said to him, Assuredly, I say to you that today, even this night before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And this part right here is why we're focusing on this for Peter. Verse 31. But he spoke more vehemently, if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And they all said likewise. Look at verse 29. Look at what Peter does. Even if all are made to stumble, even if all the rest of you guys are going to stumble, I'm Peter. It's not going to happen to me. Look at 31. Even more vehemently, if I have to die, even if I have to die with you, Jesus, I will not deny you. Whew. What do those words tell us about Peter? Pretty powerful words. Sounds like he's pretty entrenched with what he's saying. He's not going to stumble. Could we say prideful? Could we say he's boastful that it can't? No, that it won't happen to him? Extreme confidence to the point of maybe being a little cocky? So, does Peter deny Jesus? Well, we know that. He does. Let's go read that account in Mark, continuing on chapter 14, skipping over to verse 66. Now, as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, You also were with Jesus of Nazareth. But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you are saying. And he went out to the porch, and a rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him again, and began to say to those who stood by him, This is one of them. But he denied it again. And a little later, those who stood by said to Peter again, Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean, and your speech shows it. Then he began to curse and swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. A second time the rooster crowed. Then Peter called to mind the word that Jesus had said to him, Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And when he thought about it, he wept. So what was his response when he realized his mistake? He wept. I like Matthew's description of this, and when it says that he wept bitterly. To me, that just envisioned in my mind when somebody's weeping bitterly is just racked inside with and just sobbing. And like the whole body is just shuddering in pain and sadness. And I really feel like that's what Peter was experiencing at that moment. Now, I don't want you guys out there listening and watching to think that, man, this guy, he's just pointing out all the negatives of Peter. He doesn't like this guy. Well, that's not true. In fact, Peter, he's actually one of my favorite Bible characters. We know he was a real man in the entire Bible. The reason for that is the Bible does a great job of showing just how human Peter was. So the lessons from these accounts, without a doubt, show how God is compassionate and forgiving. These accounts show us that he can use anyone to work for the glory of his kingdom. Even though we can see that Peter struggled with some shortcomings, we can also see that when he was outward focused and working to please God, he demonstrated countless positive traits. In Acts chapter 2, we see Peter preaching the first gospel sermon, which led to thousands to be baptized for the remission of their sins and be added to the Lord's church. Peter wrote to the Christians in Roman provinces who were suffering, as we read about in 1 Peter. He encouraged Christians who were scattered to continue to grow in their spiritual development in 2 Peter. When I consider Peter, I would describe him as struggling with doubt. But he was also bold, and he was unafraid to follow Jesus, even when it meant leaving his livelihood behind. Peter could speak the truth, as he did on the day of Pentecost, Peter was an encourager. Peter was a lot like many of us. Now I want to look at the Apostle Paul. To say that Paul had quite the start with his Christian walk is putting it mildly. Let's go over to Acts chapter 7. Starting in verses 51. Have that right? Let me take a second. This is Stephen the martyr speaking, verse 51. You stiff-necked and uncircumcised and hardened ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit as your fathers did. So do you. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who foretold the coming of the Just One, of whom you now have become the betrayers and murderers, who have received the law by the direction of angels and have not kept it. Skipping over to verse 57, same chapter. Chapter 7, verse 57. Then they, the Jewish leaders, cried out with a loud voice, stopped their ears, and ran at him with one accord. And they cast him out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. Going over to chapter 8, verse 1. Now Saul was consenting to his death. Verse 3. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. So Stephen has just angered the Jewish leaders, and we saw that Saul was there, and he was consenting to his death. The New American Standard says he was in hearty agreement with his death. In verse 3 of chapter 8, we see that he wreaked havoc on the church, entering every house, dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. Stop and think about that for just a second. He literally watched another human being being murdered in front of him, and not only stood by and watched it, but he was in hearty agreement with it. What does that show us about Saul's character? He was violent and murderous. He was diligently seeking to harm others. Later in his life, Paul described himself as being a blasphemer, a persecutor, and an insolent man. 1 Timothy chapter 1. However, thank goodness for the however. Let's look at Saul's conversion on the road to Damascus. Please go over one more chapter, over chapter 9, starting in verse 1. Then Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. As he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. Then he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Who are you, Lord? Then the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what do you want me to do? Then the Lord said to him, Arise and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Notice that once he put his focus on Jesus, how his attitude and behavior changed. Once he put his focus on Jesus, his attitude and his behavior changed. He asked, Lord, what do you want me to do? So again, going back to character traits, you can learn about characters through their spoken words, through their actions and their thoughts. So what is his spoken words of asking Jesus what he wants him to do? What does that demonstrate about Paul? I believe it demonstrates that Paul was ready to take guidance and be submissive to God's plan. He wasn't, at that point, anymore focused on himself. He was focused on pleasing God. He met Ananias. Thinking about this, I think it's interesting how when God told Ananias to go to Saul, what was Ananias' response? He was afraid. Saul's reputation had preceded him. Acts 9 verse 13 says, Then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name. Even considering Paul's rocky start, what an amazing worker for God he became. These two men could easily describe most of us today. They showed both positive and negative character traits. What I see demonstrated in the Scriptures is that when these men focused outwardly, they became the workers they were always meant to be. Today, we need to remember that when we focus inwardly, sometimes that might lead us to lose our way. We can get distracted. We can get doubtful. We should focus outwardly, seeking to please God in all we do. When we can do that, all Christians can accomplish God's work. After looking at these two men from the Bible, I hope this has been an encouragement for you. If you've ever felt, or maybe you're feeling like you can't do God's work, or maybe it's just the case of, you don't know how. If you've ever spent any time around me, then you can probably know and can classify me easily as an introvert. I enjoy my quiet. I enjoy being by myself, or sometimes at best, sorry, Miss Paula, in small groups. Admittedly, I'm just confessing here, I've always had a problem with the Great Commission. Sometimes the thought of engaging strangers is very mentally taxing for me. So oftentimes I will psych myself out of talking to them. I saw this years ago, but it's always kind of stuck with me because I found it very humorous. Maybe you've seen the same meme, but it's the one that's got introverts with the fist like this, right? Unite separately in your own homes. I laugh when I see that meme because for me, it's true. I'll be honest, this home quarantine thing, it hasn't been hard for me. It's been pretty easy. I know a lot of extroverts are having a hard time with that. I know a lot of the ladies that I work with at school are having an extremely hard time with that. Unfortunately, hiding in your home, talking to me now, hiding in my home, it's not following Jesus' command to go out and do that great commission, spread the good news about the death, burial, and resurrection. So, what is so great about this book, Bring, Teach, Keep, is that it makes finding your role in fulfilling the Great Commission easy. Maybe you're like me, and you're an introvert, and talking to people just makes you want to run. I try to get better, but sometimes it's still hard for me. Maybe you're like that. Maybe you feel like, use that excuse. I've used this before. I don't know enough. Well, this book can help you with that. It's a super easy read. It's 71 pages long, and it's double spaced. It's not very difficult to read. I think it took me about an hour or less to read it total. So even if reading, I love to read, again, introvert, my quiet time, doing that. Even if reading is not something that you like to do, it shouldn't be a difficult, hard thing for you to do. I strongly encourage you to read it. I know the elders have a lot of plans to use this method. I think it's wonderful that we're implementing it. I think it's great. I, again, strongly encourage you to read it because it can help you. It can encourage you to find your role, to see what work you can do as a Christian, as your responsibility, as my responsibility to do God's work. Look at the character traits of Peter and Paul. They were just like us in a lot of ways, but they were able to find their role in the Great Commission. Hopefully through some more study and maybe with the help of this book, we can all find and do our part. Just want to say again, thank you for the opportunity to bring this lesson to you. I hope you have found it encouraging. I'm going to be honest, I had a good time presenting it to you tonight. I had an even better time getting into the Word to help with this lesson. So I guess at this time we're going to go ahead and sign off. I would, just as maybe a little social experiment, if you're not a member of Margaret Street and you're watching this broadcast via Facebook, or you go back and you pick it up and you watch it at a later time, smash that like button and maybe drop a comment about where you're watching from. It'd just be kind of interesting to see how far this message is being reached. So with that, I guess we're going to say good night and look forward to seeing everybody again soon. Thanks.
I need thee every hour, most gracious Lord. No tender voice like mine can peace afford. I need thee every hour, stray thou nearby. Temptations lose their power when thou art nigh. I need thee, oh, I need thee. Every hour I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior. I come to thee. I need thee, oh, I need thee. Every hour I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior. I come to thee. I need thee every hour, in joy or in pain. Come quickly and abide. My life is in vain. I need thee every